looking specifically at Fabo and that interior and what they were able to bring into with Braden Fisk being alongside with him. We'll talk about it too with Daryl Jackson and not getting his waiver from the NCAA. Fabo and Jared Verse, like you said, those guys could have moved on, but with NIL and those opportunities alongside too with some of your other teammates talking you into coming like a Trey Benson, Jordan Travis, Johnny Wilson, having those guys get in your ear and say, hey, let's make a run in 2023. That allowed, these guys to make the process a little bit easier and went more of the route of sticking around in Tallahassee for another season. And Fabo got injured early in the season last year and didn't get to see a ton of him until the end of the season, dealing with that injury. So he needed also a good answer year for him to get himself into that draft and push himself up. And so that's something that he is specifically going to be targeting. And then for Jared Verse, he could have easily gone, like you said, he could have been, a second rounder most likely, but now with him staying, he's projected to be one of, if not the top defensive end product available going into this 2024 NFL draft. So, when you bring those two stars back, it's huge. You lose Jamie Robinson to the NFL draft, who was a pivotal piece. And the secondary, Mark, we've talked about him quite a bit, just of his smarts, and he puts himself in the right spot at the right times. And he saved a lot of touchdowns for Florida State's defense throughout his career, and definitely last year as well. That's something that adds on to the question mark of that safety room. But to have two of your bigger leaders, maybe your biggest leaders, come back for another season is massive, and what Florida State needs on that defense this upcoming year.
All right. Anybody else factor in along the defensive front, whether it's inside or outside, that we should look out for?
To look out for, and it's hard to miss this guy, and this is going to be Braden Fisk, the Western Michigan defensive tackle, one of the top transfers in the country coming in. Mark got to see him on the first day of fall camp, and without pads, this guy is ginormous. And, that's something Florida State and Odell Higgins, the Florida State's defensive line coach, is wanting to utilize a lot with adding pressure on the interior. And I think that's something Florida State really kind of had its losses last year when Fabo was hurt. When Fabian Levin wasn't in the games, you had just Robert Cooper holding on some offensive linemen there, but you really weren't disrupting and adding some pass rush. You were really relying on your outside rush. So Florida State bringing in Braden Fisk, there's a main reason for that. They want to get in and rip through the inside. And so having him alongside now Fabo, Joshua Farmer, Malcolm Ray, some of these other guys, I talked about it earlier, but Daryl Jackson, we were expecting him to hopefully get that waiver and see him out in the field in 2023, but the NCAA has denied that appeal for his waiver. So now Florida State's in a really tough spot of not being able to add the Miami defensive tackle transfer, which would have been, just icing on the cake almost for this defensive line. It's not a brutal loss for the Seminoles, but it really, I think, could have really been a potential game changer for the defense specifically, maybe not as a team overall, but this would have really helped this defense. And, you got to have some younger guys step up like Ayobame Tafase. Daniel Lyons is showing a lot of strides too. I've really liked what I've seen from him. He's also put on some size. I think he was the most technically sound defensive tackle I've seen since being on the ground on site covering Florida State. I always am over there watching the offensive line versus defensive tackles, and Daniel Lyons really good with his hands. Has good footwork and is able to get passes blockers well. And, adding that size, I think helps a ton. He was going against first team offensive line and causing some problems and ripping through. So defensive tackle, I think there's a lot to like. And then you also, we keep forgetting this guy. He's been around the program for a long while, it feels like, but Dennis Briggs is going to be returning as well. He's kind of a hybrid between outside and inside. They're going to use him in that same type of way, along with Braden Fisk. You can put him on the outside as well. So a lot of utilizations that Odell Higgins has in his chamber for this upcoming season. But maybe the significant part about this is you got to make sure Fabian Lovett is full and 100% ready to go. And then that loss of Daryl Jackson is pretty tough. But other than that this defensive line in the trenches is loaded. Yeah, Jared Verse, big time getting him back for another season. I know we were talking about him earlier in the show, but having him back, you had Fabian Lovett on the inside. It just goes to show what Florida State I think NIL wise helps a little bit there for sure, but just the hungriness that Jared Verse brings, no matter what, this personality is all about competition. And he started that whenever first arriving last spring or 2 springs ago, whatever you want to call it. He was bringing the energy to practice, highly competitive. And a lot of players weren't really fond of him right off the beginning, but he earned their respect. And, he's a guy that will take it to you all throughout practice and then, be a good teammate off the field. And that's really added on a lot of different kind of confidence along with this defense, physical. He's out there to make plays, and just specifically going into this upcoming season, he wants to reach that top defensive end prospect going into this 2024 NFL draft. But he's really bought into Mike Norvell in this process, and Coach Papuchis, Florida State's defensive ends coach and special teams coach, really bought in on improving himself in a lot of different ways, because he was pretty raw last year a little bit as well, and there's a lot of improvement that he can still do and jump himself up more in the draft boards. But he's going to play a big role. We know what you're going to get out of Jared Verse. It's really outside of that you've had experience out there. And this was specifically talking about Pat Payton, who we saw make flashes last year and got into the rotation over Derek McLendon, who's now with Colorado, and Deion Sanders. Pat Payton was there, but he hasn't had a whole ton of full season game experience. And that's something that Pat Payton is going to be expected upon this upcoming year. And so can he be out there throughout those drives, and can he have those consistency? Can he create a pass rush? I think he was good in the run game last year and was able to set the edge for the most part. But biggest thing, I want to see him get to the quarterback more in 2023. So Payne will be, someone to keep a close eye on this upcoming season. That will be DE1 and DE2. And then you look at who's up next. You're kind of a little thin here, in my opinion. It does stink that you lost Derek McLendon. You also lost Quashon Fuller 2 years ago, lost him over to Maryland. So you relied in the transfer portal again, and you went with Gilbert Edmond from South Carolina, who in the spring I think he's the most athletic defensive end. Definitely thinner, not as big as Jared Verse, because Jared Verse, for his size, is extremely athletic. But just athleticism-wise, shiftiness, I think Gilbert Edmond is that. And he actually added on a really significant size, seeing him on the first day of fall camp. He put on some good size, Mark, and that's what we like to see. We like some big boys that can move off the edge, and Gilbert Edmond was that, and he's had some nice signs in camp thus far, being about a week and a half in. So that's a huge sign for Florida State. They've got to have, I think, 3 starting potential defensive ends in this unit, just because of what kind of run that they want to make this upcoming year. Because outside of that, you've really got some youngsters in the back end of things. And you also, too, you look at Byron Turner. Can he take that next step too? Could he be a potential, could he be a product of a starter, or at least a second team guy that can come in and cause some havoc here and there? Byron Turner, one that didn't put on a whole ton of size too going into this fall camp. I was kind of questioning that, but if he's technically sound and he's able to get to the backfield frequently, that'll be huge for him. That's really going to be, with his assets and his size, he's going to have to be a pass rush. He's going to have to bring that element in a tough way. And like we were talking about earlier with Braden Fisk and Dennis Briggs, those guys too can be used on the outside, and that's how Adam Fuller will use them as well. So you're not really constraints wise having to keep Braden Fisk on the inside. You can put him on the outside. He was able to do that at Western Michigan a little bit as well. So that's your defensive end room.